Hey there, Knicks fans. How you doing? It's your boy, Jonathan Macri, with you for another episode of the Knicks Film School Podcast. We are coming at you on recording this Sunday at about 8 p.m. Hoping no more crazy shit happens this weekend and we could just make it to media day in one piece. I know he's still in one piece because he holds himself together quite well. Jeremy Cohen. Hello, sir. How are you?
Hello, John. I'm more well-rested and more processed of the trade compared to when we did it on Friday. But yeah, how about you?
I'm okay. I was listening. It's funny. So I can shout him out because it's a fellow Blue Wire podcaster, the Dane Moore podcast I listened to today. Dane obviously has been covering the Timberwolves for a very long time. And even though his podcast now is more like general NBA, he's still a Timberwolves guy through and through. And he was like, I guess in some kind of like, he was away on Friday night. So him and his co-host did not record until Saturday. And they were like, they opened the show. They're like, I'm really happy that we didn't record on Friday night because there was just so much going on. And thoughts were all over the place. And now we had time to collect our thoughts. And if those are this, I'd be like, wow, we must have sounded like a bunch of nincompoops coming on here trying to process this in real time as details were coming in.
We did. See, I got a direct message. I'll make their identity anonymous, right? But I got a message and it was like, I can't believe you even brought up Jericho Sims starting at the 5. And I was like, you know what? You try sing in front of 17,000 live listeners when this trade has hit you out of nowhere at 11 p.m. on a Friday, and you get hit with a question that you don't even see coming, and you figure out an answer to that. And then they're like, you know what? Fair, valid, get it. And that's the nature of what we do.
Your mind doesn't work right. So Charlotte got reported as the third team. Like, I went to their cap sheet and I was looking at like contracts, not for a second being like, wonder if they have an exception maybe they didn't use where I don't have to worry about Magic. It's just your mind leaves your body and you're just kind of flying on emotion. So this episode, we're not going to go for 3.5 hours for one, is going to try to attempt to be a little more grounded. We'll now that we've had a little time to process the trade, we want to try to talk about it in more civilized terms. So I want to open with this because I've tried to pay close. I don't always do this, but in this instance, I've been really curious about the reaction. And I've been curious about the reaction from Knicks fans. I've been curious about the reaction from Wolves fans. And I've been very curious about the reaction from people who cover the league and who are maybe a little bit plugged into the league and all of that sort of thing. And the consensus that I've come to, and I want to ask you if you feel differently or if you feel the same way, is that for all the opinions that exist, other than maybe just like some people that are always going to be diehard Knicks side of things, no matter what they do, I don't see anyone who views this as a home run for the Knicks. Do you feel, let's start with that. Do you feel differently or do you feel roughly the same?
I'm still unsure of where I lie in terms of my opinion on the trade, which tells me it was probably a fair trade. Which, if it's a fair trade, it's not going to necessarily be a home run. Now, trades can be win-wins. You know, I think there's something to be said of the
or lose-lose
OG Anunoby or lose-lose. You know, it could be anything. The OG Anunoby for RJ Barrett and Manu Quickly trade, I'd say both teams would benefit from that. That could be. I mean, that could be the case here too. But I get a lot of it from the Knicks' perspective. Unless it's money, which it very well could be for Minnesota, I just struggle to figure it out from their perspective. Because this was a team that went to they went far.
Yes.
And suddenly they're changing up their team. And the Naz Reid portion of it, and we won't spend a ton of time on the Timberwolves, but the Naz Reid focal point always felt like, okay, something had to bubble up. Because when they gave that salary or that contract to him, giving that player option felt
to
like
Naz Reid, to be clear.
To Naz Reid. was, well, something has to give. You trade for Gobert, you give Naz Reid something that puts more pressure. It's not like you had a 4-year deal. Yeah. You have a new contract coming in. Something had to give. And moving Gobert, that's not something I saw Connolly doing. And sure enough, they didn't trade Naz Reid because they view him with what he can do and for the salary he's got as someone who can add that benefit. But then the question, this was the thing that always kind of confused me about any potential Cat for Julius conversations, is that the Wolves took back Julius Randle. And I don't know about you, John, but in any scenario that I entertained about Cat, Julius, it always came back to, why would the Wolves take back Julius Randle? And it doesn't mean, hey, because Julius Randle is on the Timberwolves, that he will be there by the deadline, that he will be there.
I thought about that today.
A year from now.
Where everybody's assuming, like, what's he going to do, next summer, this and that. Mm-hmm. I'm not 100% convinced he's going to be here after the trade deadline, but continue. Sorry, I didn't want to cut you.
Right. No, I feel the same way. They got the value that they needed to, but then I kept wondering, why now? Why is it? And it could have just been that the Wolves felt this was something we eventually have to look into. If we can get this level of value and then we can get a pick out of it, get Donte DiVincenzo, get Randle, move Randle for something, then save more money, cut more of your costs down to get even further closer to the second apron, worrying about, or even go above the second apron this year, but still reduce what you owe. And then next season, the 2025-26 season, that's when you roll into it as we're below the second apron. We could afford to do that. We could bring back Naz Reid. He's our starting 4. We got Donte out of it. We've got this Pistons pick. We've got whatever Julius gets them. That sort of thing. But still, they didn't have to do this trade. They didn't have to trade Cat this season. Much like the Knicks, if they really wanted to push it to next offseason, they could have found a way. But both, I'm guessing, struggled with how they were going to view each marquee player as time went on. And I'm sorry, but the idea that this trade was shocking, I think the timing of it was probably very surprising. But the framework of it, the main pieces, give me a break. There's just no way. There's no way that this came as a surprise in concept to someone like Cat. And I'm sure Julius knew that with the contract extensions looming, there was a possibility that he could go somewhere else. But more from the Cat side, I'm sorry. I will not buy that this was this amazing, I'm stunned sort of thing. It was purely a timing standpoint as opposed to a destination perspective.
Yeah, you said a lot there on the surprise to Cat thing. I should note that the Hoop Collective did an episode on the trade, and Wendy told a story about how Cat wanted to have a talk with Tim Connolly after last season, not just now, but like a year ago, and basically looking for assurances like, are you like, I want to make sure you're not going to trade me. And Tim Connolly apparently said a lot of nice things, but at no point could he tell him. And he was very upfront with him. He said, I can't sit here and tell you that, I'm not going to trade you. I can tell you I don't want to trade you. I can tell you we love you here and the whole thing. But so I think it was definitely the framework existed for a while. But to your point, I think the timing of it, right? I think that's the interesting part. And I think I want to get back to some of the other things you said, but just stick with the timing for a second. Couldn't it have been as simple as the Knicks up until this point were unwilling to include DiVincenzo in the deal? Mm-hmm. They decided that, okay, we'll give in. Now we could get back to why they decided to give in at this time. But once they decided to give in, that's what gave Minnesota the okay to pull the trigger. I think on Minnesota's end, I think that checks out. Does it not for you?
Agreed. That was the one linchpin and then it was removed.
So then it's like, well, why did the Knicks wait until this point to include DiVincenzo in the deal? And I had a devilish thought. Well, two thoughts. One is devilish, and one I'm just stealing from I forget which podcast. I listened to a bunch of podcasts this week. Oh yeah, it was actually Bill Simmons' podcast. Had Austin Rivers on, and Bill was just kind of you never know. Sometimes Bill like says things where he like maybe hears stuff. Sometimes he says things out of his ass. But he did mention like there's possibility that there were some other teams after Cat, and maybe that's what pushed New York to include DiVincenzo in the deal. I could see that. The devilish part of me, because everybody's bringing up Leon Rose and Tibbs went to Julius's court naming ceremony, right?
Mm-hmm.
Wouldn't, if you wanted to make everybody out there convinced that you were not going to, like, you were okay, we're set with our team, we're set with Julius Randle, we are not changing our roster before, and at least where this guy is concerned, heading into media day, would that not be the sort of thing that you would do?
It could. I think, yeah, ultimately, Shams talked about how Julius and Mitch was just not an offer that was getting it done from Minnesota's perspective.
Yes.
And the Knicks, of course, right. And the Knicks, of course, knew how Mitch was doing over the summer with his rehab.
Yeah.
So when word came out about how Mitch wasn't going to be ready, it probably escalated things a little bit more. And this is a team that just won't sacrifice games. They won't take any games off.
You're not wrong, but like I was talking to Benji on Spaces on Saturday night. He did it in impromptu Spaces. He made the very salient point, like, you don't trade for Karl-Anthony Towns because you're missing a center. It could be a factor, but this is it's just such a monumental organizational decision. I don't know. I just thought like maybe that was the Knicks' last ditch attempt to, get the Wolves to come, maybe more towards their side, whatever. I don't know who knows how long these negotiations have been going on, but in any case, the Randle part of it, I'm working backwards through everything you went through. I feel like a lot of people like this from Minnesota's end. Maybe they don't like love it, but everybody seems to be in agreement. Like, wow, they had to trade Cat. This was about as good as they were going to do. And then when they get into the nuts and bolts of what the basketball is going to look like, when they get to the Randle part of it, everybody's universally kind of like, well, they'll have to figure that part out. But we like all this other stuff. And it's like, yeah, you got to figure that part out, which makes me, again, continuing to work backwards. Why were the Wolves ultimately comfortable trading Karl-Anthony Towns? And then this may seem like an overly simplistic question. This may seem like an overly complicated question, because I think there's a simple answer. And I think the simple answer is something you just said, which is that they have Naz Reid. Mm-hmm. And while Naz Reid cannot do all of the things that Karl-Anthony Towns could do for this team, for the Timberwolves team, what he does is, I'm not going to say better, because like, yeah, you could argue he's a better defender and that's really it. But like, what do they need from that spot? They need a backup center. They need a guy who could guard fours, and they need, most of all, a guy who could space the floor and like really put pressure on a defense. Someone that defenses are going to need to guard. Now, I don't think Naz Reid is the shooter that Towns is, but he's pretty damn good, and the numbers seem to reflect that this past season. So, like, Julius now fitting in, I think, is going to be interesting, which now brings me back to my original point, my original question to you, which is like, nobody seems to love this trade for the Knicks. And I think the reason why is what I just said, which is that we have gone from Karl-Anthony Towns being a player who, for 2 consecutive years, led the NBA GM's poll in, if you could build your team around anyone in the league, any player, twice they named this guy. And now it has been 7 years since the second one of those polls. And now the consensus seems to be, well, the Wolves would probably be just as well off with Naz Reid, And this really just does come down to, is there anything left? Is there any bloom left on the Karl-Anthony Towns rose? And are the Knicks trading for a guy that we've already seen the best of him? Or are the Knicks trading for some version of the guy that we thought, like, for a lot of years, like, man, if you had this guy on your team, it unlocks so much. And that's kind of what I wanted to get into a little bit today. But before we even get there, I just have a simple question for you. What would you rather have? Julius Randle, Donte DiVincenzo, and a protected first round pick, or 4 unprotected first round picks, an additional lightly protected pick, and 2 unprotected swaps.
I see where you're going with this.
So answer the question.
Considering the age and projection of where I see the Knicks, and nothing is certain in the future. Man, I think I would rather go with the Julius package. And the reason I would say that is because the likelihood, even if you own another team's future, which we've seen can still ruin other teams.
You're speaking from the Knicks perspective, right?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, I should have asked the question in a different way, but continue.
Well, the thing is, it's like, are you saying that the unprotected picks will get you someone in value greater than, and not you, this is rhetorical.
Yeah.
Greater than an all-NBA, multi-time all-NBA player? The answer is probably not. But also, if that player is someone who you feel doesn't help get you from where you're at to the next level, then it feels more like they're great individual talent, but there are questions about their effects on winning and the team.
I know. See, and this is something I've seen burbling up about how in the aftermath of the Cat trade, like there are fans of Julius Randle who are very upset with how Julius Randle is being discussed in the aftermath of this trade. To which I say, there are smart basketball people out there who think that the best scenario for the Timberwolves would maybe just be for Julius Randle to opt out of the player option of his contract and walk. That is not something you say about a player with, like, the way you just described him. He's a multiple-time All-NBA player. That's not, those two things do not jive, which gets us into why we got into this problem in the first place. It's because Julius Randle is in the, I guess what we'll call the Brandon Ingram zone, or, the DeMar DeRozan zone, or to a lesser extent, the Zach LaVine zone. There's injury issues there and he makes more money, but like, you get the gist. This class of NBA player that their resumes say this and the perception around the league is this, which is different because of, okay, where do they fit in on a championship caliber team? So I'll ask the original question in a different way. Do you think that there is any of 29 teams out there other than the Knicks who would rather have Julius DiVincenzo on the Pistons pick instead of 5 or 4 unprotected picks, a slightly protected first, and then multiple swaps? Because I say no.
The preference would be the unprotected picks on the swaps.
Yes, exactly. Okay.
Yeah.
Would you also agree with me? And again, I'll bring it back. I promise that if you compare the resume, not even the resume, just like compare Karl-Anthony Towns to Mikal Bridges, there isn't really a comparison. Because again, spouting resumes, multiple time All-NBA, 4-time All-Star. This was a fun stat, which I don't actually even think is like cherry picking numbers. In the last 7 years in the NBA, there's been 5 guys who have a average, I think, at least 23 points a game and have a 58 effective field goal percentage. One of them is Karl-Anthony Towns. You want to guess the other 4?
I'm gonna guess they're elite.
They're pretty good. It's Nikola Jokic, Kevin Durant, Steph Curry, and Giannis Antetokounmpo. So MVPs, like all those guys have obviously won MVP. So again, I don't think there's any argument that like, Cat should be universally ahead of Mikal Bridges in the perception around the league, and it's not even close.
Mm-hmm.
Now I'm going to bring us back around. Even people who were like, yeah, the Knicks gave up a lot for Mikal Bridges. Even people who thought that. No one hated that trade. And the majority of people, I think, in Knicks land and the majority of people around the league, I think were like, yeah, I like this move. Like they went all in on the guy that's going to fit what they do, and he's a perfect fit for who they are and like all of the things. He's going to extend there, all this shit. And for Cat, there's none of that. There are people like me who I'm like, yeah, I'll talk myself into this. I can be excited about this, sure. But like, it's all begrudging. It does, like, nobody's in love with this thing. And it really just does come down to the consensus around this player, around Karl-Anthony Towns as a basketball player, as a player that you could win with, has slid so far in the other direction that for as much as there is the Timberwolves angle of this, where it's like they needed to get out from under this, and they did about as good a job as they could getting out from under it by getting real value in the Randle whatever plus DiVincenzo plus his pick. I think there's another angle of it that maybe people are talking about it. I haven't seen it, which is that maybe I can't believe I'm going to be this guy. Maybe we're forgetting how good Karl-Anthony Towns is and could be in a normal circumstance. Mm-hmm. And I'm sorry it took me so long to get around to that point, but that's really what I wanted to get at. Because if we're looking at this from a Knicks perspective, and we're trying to justify this, and we're trying to make it like this is not something that they did out of desperation or because Leon Rose has a connection with Towns going back since he was his age, when he was a teenager, the whole thing. I think that's what it has to be. And I'm okay drinking that Kool-Aid, acknowledging that it's Kool-Aid. So I'm offering you a cup, and I want to know if you want to get in on this while the getting's good.
I'll gladly take it. And the reason I'll take the cup is you also have to consider Towns and Tibbs have worked together in the past. It was not the most harmonious relationship.
No.
I'd say both, though, in that time have grown, and they needed to be separate and change separately in order to come back together. We know that Tibbs has had a history of bringing out the best in a lot of players. So the hope would be if you've got Towns doing all these excellent things, and Finch is a fantastic coach in his own right, that at least based on the personnel and how the team operates, that the Knicks could better put Cat in a position to succeed in a way that the Wolves tried to and did, but even better than that. The pick and pop opportunities are going to be great. Screening's good. I mean, what was one of the things, John, if you remember, and I know you probably do, from the 2015 draft class?
One of the best things?
One thing that stood out to me, the most hilarious thing of that whole time frame was in 2015 when Phil Jackson, his confidant, talked about the size of Karl-Anthony Towns' wagon, his caboose, his butt. He's a big guy, right? There's a wider frame there.
I think you were going here.
But the point I'm making here is that was used all to think about screening and boxing out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hogging the lane, whatever it would be. Bringing that presence, because Mitch dominated, as we know, Cleveland series and other moments too, played very well against Embiid, held his own often, but his frame, very fragile, very thin. It seemed like every time there would be a screen, Mitch would not really absorb a ton of the contact. He'd almost slip the screen, and everyone and their mother knew exactly what was going to happen, that he was going to roll to the basket. And now with Cat, you have the opportunity for him to roll. You have the opportunity for him to pop. If you have another 5 next to him and you have Cat playing more minutes at the 4, you can be a little bit more adventurous. Sure, that 5 is probably going to roll more to the dunker spot, but also Cat above the break, to me, sounds great. That's a lot of where he took his shots. If you have OG and Mikal in opposite wings, and you have Cat above the break, and you have some pick and pop, pick and roll option, a 5 sets a screen, frees up players to be in the spots that they are best suited to be in because of their talents, mixing and matching where you need to. The Knicks didn't play a ton of drop at times. They certainly did. There's rim protection, something that they're accustomed to. But now you've got versatility a little bit more, finding ways to do that. And it's just adding another dimension. And the biggest knock against Randle, in my opinion, was that he could simply not guard the 5. It's exactly why the Obi Randle tandem was idealized, but never done in practicality. It's because neither of those players was trusted enough to guard the 5. And to at least have that level of versatility is extremely important and adds this dimension to your team you didn't quite have. But on top of that, the Knicks leaned further and further into the importance of catch and shoot threes. And we talked about this during one of the cap or no caps, which was that if you looked at the top 100 players in 3-point percentage, you took at least 75 catch and shoot threes last year. Okay. The Thunder led the league with 7. The Celtics and Knicks had 6. The Nuggets, Pacers, and Wolves had 5. One of those 5 was Karl-Anthony Towns. Of course, one of the 6 the Knicks had was Donte DiVincenzo. Yeah. But we also know that Julius Randle consistently ranked towards the bottom in catch and shoot opportunities. So much of the defense understood if he's going to take that shot, we're comfortable with him taking that shot. It's fine because we have a feeling of how it's going to go. And if he beats us, all right. What was dangerous about Julius was he could pull up, but his pull-up game really wasn't strong. He could just flash it also because of how strong he could be going to the basket or facilitating, finding those open looks. And the Knicks then brought in Cat, who, of course, ranked in the top 100. They waived him, but they'll probably bring him back once the facilitating of the deal goes in.
Marcus Morris
Sr. I don't expect him to see plenty of time, but it shouldn't be a coincidence, folks, that he is a top shooter in terms of catch and shoot opportunities. Yeah. Mikal Bridges finished outside of the top 100, but we all know he's a really good shooter. And in the right role where he's not engineering an offense that seems anemic to scoring outside of Cam Thomas, more is going to be done to put these guys in their spots. The question I keep going back to, and this was the Randle portion of it, was how do you get those guys in their spots and hit them with the ball? It's going to take more ball movement. Like Cat has never been someone who's found corner threes. Like, he shoots from above the break. He's a high usage player. He's not ever been the type who can distribute. But the thought process here is if you have great shooting talent completely around the floor, you've got Cat above the break. If he's one pass away, if you're Tibbs, you're hammering Cat to look more in that direction. Hit Mikal above the break so he's in the corner. Hit OG in the same way in the other side. Finding a more cohesive option on offense, super important. And so with all of that said, with the Julius factor, it gummed up the works, and we can point to the January 2024 Knicks as like peak cinema. And it just, to me, that was a great sample size. Sorry, let me rephrase. It was a great time, but the sample size just was not there. And when you look at the opponents, they weren't great. With all that said, I would have absolutely, if you handed me another Kool-Aid cup with talking about the January 2024 Knicks and how they could be perennial contenders, I would have taken it because that's where the fandom comes into play. But
sure,
opening up the floor in ways that this is truly the best Knicks shooting team we have ever seen is compelling enough for me to say there are trade-offs, but it's a worthwhile one. And at the end of the day, I'm comfortable with it.
I'm so happy you said towards the beginning of that, you talked about pick and pops. Mm-hmm. Again, shout out to fellow Blue Wire podcaster Dane Moore. I was listening to it while I was driving, and I almost drove off the side of the road. He quoted a stat. Last year, Anthony Edwards assisted, apparently, I'm quoting their pod, Cat on 8 pick and pop threes. 8. The whole season. And I'm like, I would have thought that there was like a game where Anthony Edwards like assisted Cat on 8, maybe not 8, but like, a handful of pick and pop threes. That should be like the staple of their offense, mm-hmm. which, by the way, ranked like whatever it ranked, 19th or 18th or 20th in the league. It's not very good. And then they just kind of went on to say, and I was very happy I listened to it because obviously I don't watch as much Timberwolves basketball as they did. Like that pairing never worked. Like those guys never really gelled in terms of Anthony Edwards and Karl-Anthony Towns. And I think you just talked about Julius Randle and his fit in terms of what the Knicks ideally wanted to do. And I think Jalen Brunson and Julius Randle made each other better, to be abundantly clear. And I think Julius Randle made his teammates a lot better. And in particular, I think Julius Randle did a great job of finding Jalen Brunson for catch and shoot threes. Again, you just talked about this. But I never got the sense watching Julius either with Brunson or with anybody else for that matter, other than like Reggie Bullock and maybe Evan Fournier a little bit, that it was a real, like the synergy was like at the level that we see when it's like the highest level of synergy we can see, which, and again, this is was getting to a lot of people who do like this trade kind of had this burbling undercurrent of, man, I know they were down a bunch of players, but there was something I really liked about the post Julius team, the team that came on after January 27th, where how those pieces fit together and how they played together. And I think this is kind of getting at the heart of what makes this trade make sense for the Knicks and honestly for the Wolves as well, which is the cat didn't work with where they were going. And I haven't even mentioned the fact that they moved him from his main position of center and put him in power forward. And I think Julius, like, they always made it work with Julius and they always got the most out of Julius because they had no choice. Like, Tibbs came here and helped unlock this like Julius All-NBA thing. And from that point forward, he became such a fundamental part of their team that they were never going to trade him unless there was an opportunity to trade him for what has Ian Begley been reporting for literally years? They're not going to trade Julius unless they get a better player in return. Well, what do you know? They got a better player in return. And I think this really has a chance. This often really has a chance to be like, I mean, I think it has a chance to be the best offense in the league. I think it should be the best offense in the league. Like, I'm sure you've looked at the numbers on cleaning the glass. There were 2 consecutive years before they brought in Gobert to Minnesota where Karl-Anthony Towns, when he was on the floor for the Wolves, the Minnesota was 11.7 points per 100 possessions better on offense, and then 11.2 points per 100 possessions better on offense. Both of those numbers, those were in, by the way, 2019-20 and then 2020-21. Those were both in the 98th percentile league-wide, which is pretty freaking good. Like, that is what he is capable of. Like I mentioned, the effective field goal percentage. We haven't even talked about Mikal Bridges. Mikal Bridges, 56 effective field goal percentage over the course of his career. This is a team that has so many times under Tibbs. What's it, 3 times now? Twice, and maybe once they were like right there. Been a top 10 offensive team. The last year they were, or 2 years ago they were what, 4th? And I think last year they were somewhere in like the bottom of the top 10. And they've been doing it with smoke and mirrors. Mm-hmm. It's like we keep asking this question: how is this one of the worst not one of the worst shooting teams in the league, but like a bottom half of the league shooting team? Yes, and they're a top 10 offense and like really getting close to a top 5 offense. Now you're adding the one thing that they didn't have, which is shooting. So this is where I'm at, and I know we haven't said a word about the defense yet, and we haven't said a word about the depth yet, which is that's probably what will judge whether this trade is a success or not. And I figured maybe we could talk about because the defense, I feel like we kind of have said everything that needs to be said. It's just a matter of like seeing it and what they do and how they can get better over 82 games. Can we talk about the depth for a little bit before we get out of here?
Yes, but I just want to add on to something in terms of the Julius and Jalen pairing. The stats, and it's so muddled because Julius went down in January and we had less than a month of the OG Anunoby Knicks, and there was never a time where it felt like a huge sample size until after Julius was hurt, and then the Knicks were rolling, but then OG missed time. So, but if you look at the on-offs of just last year, for example, in 1,365 minutes where Julius and Jalen played together, the Knicks had a net rating of 6.18. Let's say 6.2. Yes. Jalen on, Julius off the floor, 1,361 minutes, 4 shy of when they shared the court together. That was a 10.74 net rating. Both of them off the floor, 955 minutes. That was negative 5.57 net rating. Just Julius with no Jalen, 265 minutes, 3.81 net rating. And if you don't want to go off of that, instead you want to go to cleaning the glass, well, when the two played together, they were it was 2,772 possessions. Okay. That was the 86th percentile. It was a difference of plus 7.3. That's very good. But when it was just Jalen Brunson and Julius Randle was off the floor, 2,624 possessions. That would be 95th percentile, plus 10.9. And then if you look at Julius without Brunson, it was 516 possessions, 68th percentile, plus 2.9. The advanced numbers don't like Julius Randle in a lot of ways. And it goes back to the Timberwolves portion of it. where like the pick and pop, the lack of pick and pop, I'm sure that will actually work fine for Julius since that's not his game.
Yeah.
He and Edwards will be great just following a similar script. But then you walk into the Naz Reid of it all. Because if Donte DiVincenzo, let's take it as face value, where he was upset at the playing time aspect. Let's say that's true. And he goes to Minnesota and he's going to still see time, but he's coming off the bench because he's not playing ahead of Anthony Edwards and he's not starting at point and he's not playing ahead of McDaniels. And you've got Randle and you've got Naz Reid and you've got Gobert. So that he's a bench player. But then you have the whole issue that Naz Reid would have had, or that Naz Reid has now, which is, well, why am I coming off the bench? I deserve to be a starter in this league. And we know that the Wolves love Naz Reid, and we know that they acquired Gobert. So it then ties into I don't think Julius Randle should perhaps look into purchasing a home in Minnesota. Maybe there's a month by month sort of opportunity here from a leasing or a rent standpoint that you kind of think through and how it doesn't fit. But yes, defensively, if we want to shift into that, the amount of mental lapses on the Julius side were maddening. He was the most no, yes player I've maybe ever seen on offense. And then defensively, it was last year when he would say, and this was more on the offensive side, but I'm sure it still applied to the defense too, where he says to Paul George on podcast P, I'm finally watching film. And you're a Knicks fan. You're thinking, what? You're just doing film? Like you're just watching it? Where was that before? And
yes,
just the chaos that kind of comes from there. And I know he was embellishing.
No, but in fairness, Cat's pretty mending on defense with the fouls too. Which
exactly. The difference though is and this would not happen because if it did, it would be the NBA Finals. But if you had Julius matching up on defense with Jokic, it'd probably go as we expect it to.
No, it would not go well.
But with Cat, you at least could see the proof that was in the pudding.
And he aptly guarded Kevin Durant in the first round too.
That's not like there's a versatility there from the defensive end where maybe you can tease a little bit more. You can't teach the difference in size between Karl-Anthony Towns and Julius Randle.
And that's why you just said it. That's the most important thing anyone has said. You can't. It's so stupid and simple, and yet it's the one thing that I feel like is maybe it's been heavily implied, but like you can't teach size.
No,
like there's something there still to, even if you believe like, look, stop with this nonsense. Karl-Anthony Towns is what he is. Yeah, that may be true. But even if you just take what he is and what we've seen him capable of doing, even just like last year, the last couple of years, there's enough there where we don't have to sit here and be like, well, if only Karl-Anthony Towns can morph into X, Y, and Z, then the Knicks will. Whereas, and I know I'm not putting, like, I know I'm not imagining this because I remember these conversations that we had with you, had with Benji, had with DJ, had with Andrew, where we're like, man, if Julius could just tap into the very best version of himself for X number of games across all of these playoff series and lock in on defense and really buy in on offense and all of this stuff, then maybe the Knicks got a shot to actually win it all. I don't feel like we have to have the same if then maybe conversation with Cat. Now, this wasn't a Julius for Cat trade. This was a Julius and DiVincenzo for Cat trade, which let's now hit the last topic, which is the depth. Let's go 1 to 10. On a scale of 1 to 10, I'm not going to ask like I want to ask specifically like as something that will prevent them from reaching their ceiling this season. So implied in that is like they still have till the trade deadline and like there's the buyout market and the whole thing. And I understand they have no room to sign any buyout guys as of right now, but maybe there's always moves you can make to open up more spending power. How worried are you that their depth is going to be the thing that prevents them from reaching their goals?
Honestly, I'm not. I'm not that worried about it right now.
So you're like a one or a 2 or something.
Yes. Here's the thing. Do we want to also talk about Mitch? Because I think that's a looming factor.
I feel like there's no way to have the depth conversation without talking about Mitch.
Correct. Okay. So the way that I have seen it with Mitch is still, I wasn't expecting this level of trade when there were lingering concerns about a week ago or so that Mitchell Robinson's hurt and is going to be missing time. But I'm still of the mindset that they try to move on from him soon. And now maybe they don't find the right move. But what is the right move? If I'm the Knicks, I'm just looking for someone who's a productive NBA player. That's really the long and short of it. And
in exchange for Mitch?
Correct. But let me dive a little bit deeper into that, which is Mitch's value is certainly lower because he's hurt.
Yeah.
Because he just doesn't have that track record. I've seen a lot of trades for someone like Trey Murphy. And I just shake my head and I say, what are we doing here?
I would reverse my vasectomy and have another child just so I could offer that child up to complete that trade.
I would also have you do that. So I appreciate it. That's the furthest I'll go, which is you doing that. So thank you for your sacrifice here. But then you also come in with the, no pun intended there. You go with the fact that Trey Murphy is eligible for a new contract, even if we were to run with this. So on top of all the salary, then it just gets even more ridiculous. Like it's just,
no, then that, I mean, well, we haven't even talked about the apron concerns starting next season because they're like part of the conversation of like adding potential depth or like flipping Mitch or whatever is the can they stay out of the second apron past the season? But we don't have to have that conversation now.
Right. And the thought process with Mitch, because a name that we saw, just example, right? Beef stew, Isaiah Stewart, someone who was talked about as an option as recently as this past week where there was a reported interest. Now, the Knicks could go about this where they say, we really like Beef Stew. We're changing our whole offensive philosophy. We're doing something very different. We see him fitting in perfectly. He's healthy. He's under contract for several years. Let's go get him. They could do that. They could also just have it be, well, we like him as a player. He's not really the player we ultimately want, but he is someone who will win us more games than Mitchell Robinson while Mitchell Robinson's hurt. And we could always flip him because if we get Beef Stew in the door before X time, we can then aggregate him with other players before the deadline and it works out just fine. So the reason I bring that up is because when you look at all of these other options, if you're to move Mitch, if it's for depth, if it's like one person, 1-to-1, forget about minimum salary that would need to make any deal work with the CBA. Sure. You could do that 1-to-1. You could do something where you do get a Robert Williams type back and you get additional salary so that you're in a good spot where if you still wanted to make other trades, you could do that. These options to me, they don't mean the Knicks are in love with these trades. It just means the red paperclip. Get from here to there, get from there to the place we want to be at. And that's why I'm trying to reserve judgment on what this team will look like until after the trade deadline, because there are so many factors about how they get from here, which is already way further than I would have realistically thought, say, even 6 months ago, let alone 4 months ago, even 3 months ago. But you just have to kind of keep getting what you need. And then you get what you want. And what you want is hopefully also what you need. But what the Knicks need right now is a healthy, durable player to slot in with this rotation. But between that and the buyout market, I do think that someone like Landry Shamet will give you those good February minutes that you need. And you don't count on him in the postseason because the regular season is long. It's rough. It's difficult. That's what she said. But it is that's just the nature of it. There are 82 games. You got to try to win as many of them as you can because of the margin of error. And so getting these like rotation end of bench, but like borderline rotation guys. I don't think Marcus Morris Sr. is going to win you many games, but if he wins you one game, it's worth it. But it's finding those margin buys. But at the end of the day, they're not going to be in the postseason. They're not going to be in the playoff rotation. Well, I wouldn't trust Landry Shamet or Marcus Morris Sr. in the playoffs. But if you're 8 or 9, if you got 8 or 9 rotation players who are ready and battle tested and know their role and are healthy.
Yeah.
Come playoff time, I don't have any qualms. I'm feeling really good about the chances.
I think I know some people hate when I praise Boston on this podcast, but I'm going to praise Boston again. I think Boston showed everybody the roadmap last year. It is, we're going to have the best top 6 in the NBA. Maybe the best top 6 that I don't say we've ever seen, but like it's as good a top 6 as you're going to assemble, especially with the modern rules. And I don't, maybe like, I know Pritchard was like he's not making the minimum, but it's a small contract. And then it's everybody else who played hashtag meaningful minutes for them was on a minimum or like on a rookie deal or whatever the case may be. And they're like, we have enough faith in mixing and matching our big guns that when we have to put in these lesser pieces, we'll be all right. We'll figure it out. We'll survive. And like those lesser pieces, especially obviously because Porzingis went down in the playoffs, like those guys had to play minutes. Like you can. They never would Boston have loved to figure out a way to trade for that perfect ideal like seventh man who could cut a wing, who could defend a little bit and shoot a little bit? Yeah, of course they would have loved to do that. I'm sure that trade wasn't out there. Great, they still went whatever they went in the playoffs, 16-3 anyway. So they got Xavier Tillman at the deadline. That was a nifty little move for them. He played important minutes. So when I see the Knicks and I see that they have this, I think I think Benji probably convinced me that we're going to see it's going to be Josh Hart as a starter, and that seems to be where this thing is headed, as it should be. By the way, I'm okay with that. So you have Deuce, who's rock solid on the bench, and the other thing I like about Deuce, pick any member of the starting 5 who goes down, I guess with the exception of Cat now. And you could just slot in Deuce. If Brunson misses a game, start Deuce. If Hart misses a game, start Deuce. McCallum misses a game, start Deuce. OG misses a game, everybody. It's a very versatile group in that sense, which is, again, when you're talking about depth, you can't have the depth conversation without having the versatility conversation. And that's what's so nice about what they've built is Mikal Bridges, OG Anunoby. Like these are all incredible. Josh Hart. These are all incredibly versatile pieces, and even Towns to a certain extent. So there's that part of it. And then you got your campaigns and your Landry Shamet and your Tyler Kolex and your Precious Achiuwas. And then the Mitch, that's why I find the Mitch piece so fascinating, because if it's Mitch, I mean, we know what Mitch is when he's healthy. He's a guy that could help you win playoff games, a guy who helped them win a playoff series. But they will have, I think, because of the timeline, because he's going to come back in December or January, they will have enough time to figure out, all right, is it Mitchell Robinson that is going to help us win however many playoff series that they end up, hopefully a few, or do we need to figure out a way to turn that salary slot into something else before this deadline? And that's why ultimately I'm not really worried, because given all those guys I just mentioned, and given the fact that they have that other opportunity, to say nothing of if they need to flip Precious into something, because he makes $6 million, like they have maneuverability here. And I'm not going to say I'm not worried at all, but I'm probably at like a 3.5, something like that on a scale of 1 to 10. So that's where I'm at.
Do you think it's fait accompli that Mitch is dealt?
No. No, if you gave me even money on both, like he's here after the trade deadline or he's not here after the trade deadline, right now I'd probably bet that he's not here. I mean, that's again just me guessing. But I thought they were going to deal Mitch at the trade deadline. 2 years, 3 years? When were the rumors of Detroit? They're in their season from hell, the Kemba season. Yeah. So and he's all he does is stick around. Do you think it's a fait accompli?
I do.
You do? Okay.
I do. And with the time that you're describing with Detroit originally, or with the Kemba season, I mean, that was when financially it didn't make sense, though, because of how small his salary was. And now this is a contender. It's funny because we said there was the thought of a few months ago after the Bridges trade, the Knicks are all in. And now they clearly showed that wasn't really all in. When is all in truly all? And the most important thing right now is ability. Usually the best ability is availability.
Yeah.
And so the most important thing is availability. And that's not something that anyone can feel comfortable Mitchell Robinson will provide. And we don't want to sit here a year from now. The Knicks don't want to sit here a year from now. Yeah. Talking about a season, talking about what ifs. And the number one question is, and what if Mitchell Robinson stayed healthy? Because when I look at the track record, I don't feel good about it. I just don't. And it's why, if you are truly focused on winning a championship this year, and we know they are, because there's nothing else to play for. There's no draft pick. There's no development. It's this team as long as it can go, because we know that windows are short and anything can happen. If we're playing the odds here, the odds are that Mitchell Robinson is not going to come back in December and January and be peak Mitch. It'll take him time to come back. He'll have to get back into game shape. We'll have to see, is he staying healthy? And if he's not healthy, is it the same type of thing that we've talked about? As a Yankee fan, I talked myself into for years, which was, you know what, just get to September and then bring players back and it should be fine. And it hasn't worked out for the Yankees because you need to be consistently healthy. It's not just, hey, here I am, didn't miss a beat, let's go. There has to be something where I can count on Mitchell Robinson every single game. And I can't. And that's purely from a health standpoint. But right now, that health factor is more important with Mitch than anything else because we know what his abilities are. And that's why I just can't see it not being the case.
I hear where you're coming from, and I don't disagree with you. The icky part of this is like, I could absolutely see Mitchell Robinson being the difference in a playoff series versus Philly, for instance. Honestly, I could even see him being the difference in a playoff series versus Boston, for as much as that has not been a good matchup for him in recent years. Well, really, just since they got Porzingis, so this year. But even honestly, and like Hartford was bombing three, like it's just not a great matchup for him. But like he's a curveball. He's something you throw out there, and like, okay, now we got to deal with this guy doing this stuff. The issue is, and this goes directly to your point, right now, post Towns trade, Mitchell Robinson kind of feels like a luxury. And I don't know that you could have a $14 million luxury when you're in the Knicks position. And you certainly can't have a $14 million luxury that you're not sure if you're going to have the ability to use. So when you add all those things up, I this is why I think I do side more on the side of all things being equal. I would bet he's probably turned into something else, but what are you going to turn him into? Again, with the salary constraints and those sorts of things, it's not like you have any, like the only first they have left to trade is the Washington fake first, right?
Correct. And swaps.
So, and they've two swaps, one of which I don't think anyone's going to care about, but the 2030 swap is that kind of last one that I view that as a better draft asset than the Pistons first, but I know reasonable minds could disagree. At least around the league, I could see that being viewed nicely. Okay, I think I got everything out that I wanted to get. Anything we didn't touch on that you feel like we should hit on before we get out of here?
The fact that the trade won't be finalized till early next week tells me there's still work to be done as well. And I don't know if that means Mitchell Robinson is finding a new home for him as part of a sticking point, or if
we would have heard that.
What
they don't need to. They can just sign and trade these other guys.
Why is it that we would have heard that when everyone was surprised at a cat trade on a Friday night?
You're right. No, you're right.
A Bridges trade came out of nowhere. Like, these things just occur. Nothing at this point really surprises me. There's some things that might catch me off guard, I suppose. But I don't think that Mitchell Robinson and them looking for a potential new home for him is out of balance here. I think it's quite possible.
This is tinfoil hat stuff. You think the holdup on the trade could be that they are potentially trying to make this into a larger deal?
Potentially, but I'm not definitively saying that's it. There are financial components here, but you also have to consider that the Knicks have to field a roster of 14 players at some point. And if they did the trade as is currently constructed, or at least theoretically constructed, the Knicks would not have enough room with the second apron hard cap to field a roster of 14 unless the only player they have, the 14th, is converting Huck Porty.
Or McCullough. Yes.
Right.
Or McCullough.
So they could do that. Or another option is they go in a different direction. And I would need to crunch it just a little bit, right? But if you took, say, and I don't mean to keep going on to this name for a reason, there's no inside info here. It's just the first name that keeps coming to my mind from an availability standpoint. If you had Beef Stew, you can't do a Beef Stew for Mitch trade 1-to-1 because of the fact that his salary is more, and the Knicks can't do that. So then you have to add a little bit more salary, but you also then perhaps start running out of pieces for guys that you can sign and trade from a math standpoint where it works. And maybe you can find that. Maybe it's Sims. Maybe it's not. Maybe there's a surprise way that they go about it. Very possible. But if they did that and they cleared enough salary to then keep Shamet and then bring back Marcus Morris Sr., that's a way that they basically say, well, we're getting a win now player in the building because Mitch can't be that. Sims was going to be in this theoretical out of the rotation anyway. We bring in someone who we can view as more depth at whatever position. That's the whole train of thought, where you get what you want exactly how you want it. And it's just like, okay, they may not want still a player like Beef Stew, but he's a better alternative on the red paper clip scale of getting from where you're at to now to there.
It's interesting that you went to him though, because him as opposed to a guy who's not a center predominantly. Mm-hmm. But the interesting thing about Beef Stew is, like, again, talking about catch and shoots, he could shoot it. Theoretically, he's going to get better at that skill moving forward. And like, no one wants to relive anything about the Detroit Pistons of last year, but like, he is a guy that if you needed him to play some spot minutes at the 4, he's at least capable of doing that. Or maybe more on point, if you needed him to play some minutes with Towns, like capable of doing that,
the reason
I can't believe this turned into a Isaiah Stewart conversation.
No, but the reason I also am going more towards the center than any other position is because we also know what the Knicks like with that catch and shoot option. And if they got a wing or a guard or a forward or whatever it would be, it's probably not going to be a player who does the catch and shoot element very well. And
because if that player is available and they're a wing player, they're probably not going to be available for what the Knicks can give.
Exactly. So then you look at, okay, well, what is Mitchell Robinson as an asset? He is limited offensively in terms of creation. He is a low usage player. He is a play finisher. He stands in the dunker spot. Great on defense. Excellent rim protector. Really great on the offensive boards. The value of those types of centers, it's just not sky high. It's good. It's fine, but it's not going to net you this really strong piece unless you add picks or other assets with it. And then at what point are you taking you very few picks to even deal from? You feel a few picks that are good to deal from. And then you're talking about moving Deuce McBride, because then you're hurting yourself on that depth point. Now you're in arguably a more untenable position. So that's why I go back to, if you're moving a center for another big man, it's a shorter putt to get from that to that than Mitch to a position player who has an offensive game, or even is so limited on the offensive end that they're a great defender. But then how do they hurt you offensively? Because we know the Knicks have done such a great job of getting spacing 1 through 4, now 1 through 5. And now they're going to bring someone in who's not a 5, who could potentially muck it up, when that's kind of the Josh Hart role, because Josh Hart is like, hey, I'm an okay shooter, not a great shooter, but I'm surrounded by really great shooters. So it works better now. I think it would hurt them more to do that, which is why I see them focusing on adding an additional big instead of it being Mitchell Robinson, if they are in fact moving Mitchell Robinson.
I think I should just have that other kid and we make the Mitch for Murphy swap happen. Okay.
Deal.
That is, I hope we now on our second attempt did this trade justice. We're obviously going to talk more about the trade on this show. Anything else before we get out of here? Andrew's here. I know. Anything we missed that I know we have stuff going on. Anything you want to say?
One piece of housekeeping that I'll mention. I obviously love participating and being a part of KFS, and I intend to do that as long as I can. If you have been listening and following our pod over the last, 13 months, you'll know that there are times where I'm unfortunately absent due to the extreme nature and demands of my job with drones. So there will be weeks, I don't want people to be surprised, where I may not be present, and instead we'll have Benji filling in, not even for me, but being my right-hand man. I'll be his right-hand man. Although, I don't know, I guess we'd have to be standing next to each other for that to be the right-hand man. One of us has to be the left-hand man. I don't know.
Someone has to be the other hand.
Benji and I are going to make this a partnership. Maybe not a domestic one because he's betrothed to his lovely wife, but we will be going... we'll have our own shifts, and when it comes to predictions, Benji and I will be our own team. I don't know the best way of phrasing it. Is it Team Jeremy and Benji? Is it Team Benji and Jeremy? I think ultimately it's Team BJ. We're all Team BJ here. It's just the nature of it. And I know with everything going on, I don't want people to be surprised, so it won't be very sloppy. It'll be nice and neat, but you'll still have me here, and I can't wait to be here.
We're gonna miss you on the days you're not. That's for sure. Jeremy Cohen, that was beautiful. Andrew, Claudio, anything else before we get out of here?
No.
Emphatic.
Let's go Mets. Yeah.
Yes. Look, I don't want to bore people with the baseball details, but my mood for the week will be dictated by what happens in Atlanta on Monday.
Tomorrow matters, though, right? Monday matters.
So I won't get into too much detail. The Mets need to win once. They play twice in Atlanta.
Oh, that's
tomorrow.
it? They only have to win once?
Just have to win once.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
And you say that like, oh, that's it. That's all I have to do is win once in Atlanta. But that's a very innocent reaction. Oh, you like your odds, right? No, I don't. I hate everything. This sport is stupid, and they're probably going to get eliminated on Wednesday anyway if they don't get eliminated on Monday. But my mood will be dictated by whether or not things happen in Atlanta tomorrow.
Well,
so
I'll be pulling for you.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Team BJ over there will not be. The hating ass Yankee fans will not be pulling for me.
I didn't say anything. I know Benji. I know your counterpart or your co-pilot very well. Is got the chop going. So I know my people. Okay. There are levels to this. That's all I'll say. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Levels. Thank you guys. Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, everybody out there listening to another episode of the Knicks Film School Podcast. We are going to have some more announcements about things that are coming up and whatnot and what have you in the coming weeks. So stay tuned for all that. But for right now, have a great start to your week, and we will talk to you soon.